Good Sunday afternoon, everybody, or morning, or whatever, wherever you are. We're continuing our study series on prophecy. We've been going through my online book on Bible topics. I've put the main two links I'm going to be using today in the chat because Chow can't be here to manage that. So any mods, if you want to be able to hang on to those links if someone needs them later, that'd be cool. I know by the title it sounds more like a bio on Daniel himself, but I kind of really did that in the book studies that I did several years ago. I had started repeating them on Thursdays a while back, but there was hardly anybody able to come at that time. But all those videos are still online, and in my, I don't know if they're in a playlist, but they're on my channel. Anyway, you can read more about Daniel as a person. And of course, he didn't do just prophecy. He also had some life experiences, you could say, that are a testament to his walk with God. And I think that's part of the reason he was chosen to be a prophet. And Daniel is like the motherlode of Bible prophecy. Certainly not all Bible prophecy is in there, but it is the most clear and sequential of the Old Testament books by the prophets. So while other ones give you very pertinent information, such as Joel and Zechariah regarding end times prophecy, Daniel really ties it all together and puts it more in a sequence. And Revelation then gives the remaining detail, because at the end of Daniel he is told to seal the book because it concerns the distant future, whereas Revelation, the very word, means to reveal, not conceal, and so that's the opening up and finishing of Daniel's prophecies. And not just Daniel's, there are at least 300 or 400 references to Old Testament prophecies, but the majority, I think, are in Daniel. So we're going to look at that. We're also going to look at Constable's notes. I can't make the text any bigger than that because it's not a responsive site and the text just goes off the screen. So, and I can't even just get this column. It goes off to the left and I don't know why. So it is what it is and we'll deal with it. So we're going to start with, as I said here, I have a whole book on Bible prophecy, and this is derived from it, but there's always little differences and things. Good to see more people in the chat. One Up on the Devil is a good name. Lev Kung Fu, Shaolin, I know I've seen your name before. And all the regulars, good to see you guys. So let's get into this. And I start out here, again, that there are prophecies scattered in the Old Testament, but Daniel is the one that is more closely tied to Revelation, in my opinion. And some of it's come to pass, some of it hasn't. But like I said, it gives a sequence more so than other prophecies. And throughout Daniel, there are several visions that all have the same four elements. The four metals in the statue, the four creatures, they all point to a series of empires, beginning with Nebuchadnezzar. People say the head, it says in here, you are that head of gold in the statue. But where there's a king, there's a kingdom. Where there's an empire, there's an emperor. So there are two sides of the same coin. So we have Babylon, then Medo-Persia, then Greece through Alexander the Great, and then Rome. Now, some people say, no, not Rome, or at least the legs would be Rome, and the feet of iron and clay would be possibly the Ottoman Empire, the Islamic Empire. But there are some problems, there are good arguments for both there, but there are also some problems, so just to be aware of that. But it is really important to understand at least something of the basics in Daniel if you want to understand Revelation. Too many people treat Revelation in isolation, and so they reach some strange conclusions that I think they wouldn't reach if they considered these things. So first I'm going to define some terms, and I know I've gone over these before. Abomination in prophecy is understood to mean a desecration of a temple. That is to say, to insult and belittle a conquered people by doing that to their god and their temple. And so this was done by typically setting up the conqueror's idol in the conquered temple, holy place, and we can see an example of that in Ezekiel 8. I'm not going to take time to do that right now, but you can check that out, that this is how it was done. Along with other practices such as when you conquered a nation, you deported the native population and only left a few, of the poorest people until you could import your people. So if you see populations being replaced in the world today, you know what's going on. This is an ancient military tactic where, in this case, in the modern case, shots aren't even being fired, although sometimes they probably should be, where the indigenous population is being uprooted and pushed aside in favor of what amounts to an invading population, that of the conquerors. I'm just saying, that's, shouldn't be something we're unfamiliar with. So the purpose of that is to defile the other god's temple, and its first use in the Bible, as far as sequenced by the normal order of Bible books, is Daniel 9:27, where it says, immediately after he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. So this is when that happens. And the next two references are also in Daniel in chapter 11, verse 31, and chapter 12, verse 11. And they include the phrase, profane the sanctuary. That's what that means. They're all different ways of saying the same thing. And we can get additional historical context from apocryphal books. Apocryphal being between the Testaments. Apocryphal means of doubtful authenticity or uncertain authorship, whereas for those who believe they are scripture, they call them deuterocanonical, that is to say, second canon. But anyway, they're between the Old and New Testaments and most standard Bibles, and they do provide historical context. So it isn't as though I'd forbid people to read these things. I never do that. I encourage them to read these things so they can see why they don't belong in the scripture. But at the same time, just like other things the Bible references, such as the annals of the kings of Judah or the kings of Israel, they're there as supporting material. That doesn't mean they need to be in the Bible. So all of these phrases are used in context of desecrating a temple, and then we've already heard about Antiochus Epiphanes, who died in 164 BC. He is the only historical figure to deliberately fill the temple with unclean things, especially a statue of Zeus with his own face on it, in the holy place, where he had also sacrificed an unclean animal on the altar to desecrate it. So they didn't mess around. They wanted to make it absolutely clear what they were doing and why. So, good to see more people in Price of Adam. I think I've chatted on everybody else, but if anybody else comes, of course, you guys will have to greet them for me. Anyway, so Daniel's prophecy of the abomination was indeed fulfilled by Antiochus Epiphanes, but long after that, like I said, Epiphanes was born in 164 BC. Then when Jesus came, which was by definition 1 AD, Anno Domini, the year of the Lord, he spoke of the abomination as still to come. So here we have Jesus himself establishing the precedent of multiple fulfillments of the same prophecy. So Antiochus Epiphanes serves as a type and shadow, so we know what to look for by what we've already seen, and we've seen how a temple is desecrated. It wasn't a defiling of a spiritual of saved people. It wasn't false teaching. It was literally a military conquest and a humiliation of the conquered people's God. And that will happen again. So there must be a temple in Jerusalem, and it will be conquered by the coming Antichrist and desecrated. Paul also spoke of the man of lawlessness, and we went over, I think last week, was it? We went over all the different names, or I put it in a document somewhere. I'm sorry right now I can't, I didn't think to link it, and I don't want to try to go looking for it. But I made a chart basically, and it's probably on my Dropbox link, which is in the description, where you look under the Bible section there. There's a bunch of things you can download. And I think I put in there this chart comparing terminology used in the Bible for Satan and this entity, the man of lawlessness, many names, just like Satan has many names. And you can compare and contrast their attributes. But Paul uses the term, and this will depend, like it's John that used the term Antichrist in his epistle, or in his gospel. No, it was in his epistle. Never mind. And then in Revelation, he uses the term beast. And first beast, second beast is also called the false prophet. The names can be confusing, but we just have to remember their names for different names for the same entities. So that's 2 Thessalonians 2, 3, and 4. He enters the temple and declares himself God at some future time, which certainly qualifies as desecration. If you go into a temple and declare yourself you're the God, you're desecrating the temple. Also in Revelation 13:14, we're told that there will be an image or idol which everyone on earth will be forced to worship, and it will be given the power to speak. So possibly some kind of AI or demonic entities have been known to possess inanimate things and speak through them. So it could be either one. Anyway, it doesn't say where this idol will be, but I'm guessing it will be in or near the temple. So we've seen this precedent of now but not yet with Antiochus Epiphanes and the future Antichrist or beast. So then the question is whether the complete fulfillment of Daniel's prophecy was met in the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in 70 AD. It should be emphasized that a complete fulfillment must meet every criterion and detail without exception. And this has not happened yet for the 70th week of Daniel. The 69 certainly, but not the 70th. So we're going to look at these quotes, and these are from the 3 gospel passages about what Jesus said about the end times. And I can't get them all on the screen at the same time, but you can see in Matthew, and then we'll read through these, and I made a bullet-pointed list just to get to the gist of it. But it's Matthew 24:14-22. He says, the gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, gospel of the kingdom, and then the end will come. Then he says, when you see the abomination of desolation as declared through the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, so Jesus is direct, there's no question who Jesus is referencing, then those in Judea must run away into the mountains. In Judea, not the church, and to the mountains. That hasn't happened. I'll go over later about what Christians did during the siege leading up to 70 AD, but those 2 details are very important. We can't insert the church here. The church is not Judea. Okay? After that will be great oppression or great tribulation. That's what the word translated tribulation means. Oppression, constriction, pressure. So it's a time of oppression. And so we can't, and of course, just as we have context for this particular oppression, that doesn't mean that every time we use the word oppression, that's what we're talking about. In the same way with tribulation. Like Jesus said, in the world you will have tribulation, but cheer up, I've overcome the world. He wasn't talking about the tribulation at that time. He was talking about, he didn't use the definite article the, he just said you will have trouble, you will have oppression, bad things will happen. Okay? But the thing is that you can use the same word in different contexts, so we have to be careful to remember that we're in the context of prophecy right now. So when it says the great oppression, or there will be great oppression, he's already given us a sequence of what happens before that. So we're not talking about the trouble in general. People who are anti-pre-trib typically do that. It's called an equivocation fallacy, where they take a different meaning of the word, they take it out of its context and put it somewhere else and say, well, see, that word tribulation is all over the New Testament. Well, duh. So is the word the, and after, and moon. doesn't mean squat. If you ignore context, you're out in uncharted waters, drifting at sea, because, as the Bible says, being driven by every wind of doctrine. You have to have context to anchor it. So, the likes of which has never happened from the beginning of the world until now, nor will ever happen again. You cannot describe 70 AD in those terms. Worse things happened before, and worse things have happened since. And Jesus went on to say, in fact, if those days had not been cut short, so it was a done deal, he's speaking of it, of a future time in the past tense, because that's what the Bible does when something is absolutely going to happen. There's no possibility it won't. They speak of it as a done deal. And this can be confusing if you surface skim. So, he says, if those days had not been cut short, all flesh would have been wiped out, but they will be shortened for the sake of the chosen people. Nobody knows whether that means the days themselves will be less than our traditional historical 24 hours each, or I think more likely to mean that the time of testing has a limit, 7 years. But some people take it to mean that 7 years will not be completed because God has to shorten it or everybody would die. Don't know. All I'm just saying is what Jesus himself said about this in Matthew 24:14-22. Now we're going to compare that with the same Olivet discourse, discourse, pretty sure, in Mark 13:14-20. And he says, he doesn't start with the gospel of the kingdom statement. He goes on to when you see the abomination. See, we have that up here, we have it down here. Then those in Judea must run to the mountains. The suffering of those days will be unlike anything that has happened since God first created the world until now, and never will be again. And about no life surviving if he didn't cut it short. Okay, so other than it skipped the gospel of the kingdom preached to the whole world, those are the same. Now Luke 21:20-28 has a little more. And when you're confused about something, or something seems left out of one passage, go by the one with the most detail and try to put them all together, which is why I'm listing them all right now. So, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by military encampments, nobody else said that. Okay, up here in Matthew, it has the gospel of the kingdom will be preached, and then the end will come, and then the abomination. But Luke says, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by military encampments, you will know that its ruin is near. Then those in Judea must run away to the mountains. So the amount of time between events is not known. It could refer to 70 AD. It could instead refer to a future time, or it could refer to both. So it does fit very well 70 AD. There was a long siege. When you see it happening, it wasn't an instant thing. It was a long siege over years before leading up to 70 AD. And we have no historical record of the Jews in Judea running to the mountains. There are some Christians who took this to be their clue to get out, and they did, but they didn't run to the mountains. They ran to some place, I think it was called Pella, not to be confused with Petra. And Pella is a fairly low-lying area, so they didn't run to the mountains, and it wasn't the Jews. But could be a dual fulfillment. And then we're matching up again with the others. There will be terrible stress on the world. Of course, we matched up here, but terrible stress on the world, or oppression, and great rage or wrath against who? This people, the Jews, still to happen. That's why there had to be Jews in Israel in this time. However many of them are illegitimate or not is beside the point. God predicted it. It had to happen. And this is a sign for us today. They will be killed in battle and taken captive to all the other nations. That's a past and probably future. Then Jerusalem will be trampled on by the nations until their time is up. The nearest antecedent is the other nations, or Yeah, by the nations until their time is up. It could refer to the nation's time or the time of the Gentiles used in other contexts, but it could also refer to the people of Israel who are being trampled until their time is up. Till their time is up. So then, pay attention to these things. We're given a sequence, not a timing. Then there will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars, and on earth the nations will be filled with anguish and perplexity due to the roaring and turbulence of the sea. I know years ago people used to say, look at the rising incidence of heart attacks. This is Bible prophecy. No, it isn't. It's saying why they're filled with perplexity. It's because of the roaring and tossing of the sea. The whole world has never been in turmoil over a tsunami here and there. I mean, they'll, terrible tragedy and talk about it for a while, and then it fades into memory, and then they go on to the next thing. But this is going to be unprecedented, as Jesus said. And in my opinion, it's like sloshing a bowl of water, like God picks up the whole earth and just shakes it. Because imagine yourself, you're a tiny microbe in that bowl, and the water's doing that. It's as if it's a tsunami, and then it goes back out to sea, and then it comes back, and it goes out and comes back. That'll scare people. Guaranteed. People will be deathly afraid and apprehensive of what's coming upon the whole world, for the forces of the heavens will be shaken. This has not happened yet. And then we'll see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with great power and majesty. But when you see all this coming to pass, when you see all this, stand up and raise your heads, for you're about to be rescued. This, in my opinion, is not a rapture verse. A, the church didn't exist then and wasn't the topic. Almost all Bible prophecy is about Israel. And B, this is about people who have just seen all these things. They went through the tribulation, and these signs have not happened yet, and so it's not about us. So then, we've got these three passages. Luke has the most detail. History shows that the people of Judea were indeed scattered among Gentile nations before, and Jerusalem has been trampled. Even today, there is a mostly Gentile control over Jerusalem, and the Israelis aren't allowed to build their temple in its ancient location, which, by the way, is not the Wailing Wall. That was the citadel, the Roman citadel there, which was built kind of, I think, north of where the temple was. The temple was on actually toward an outcropping where the Gihon River ran under it, because they needed a lot of water for the ceremonies and rituals. So that's not the Roman citadel is not the Temple Mount, but it's close by. And the Israelis are not allowed to build their temple there. Whether they're going to build it in the proper location or not is another question, but they can't do anything yet. And there have been many wars and natural disasters in the last 2,000 years. No doubt about that. But, as I'm going to go on to say here, you must ask the right questions. And that's a line from iRobot as well. Like this: did anyone desecrate the temple in 70 AD? No, they did not. It was burned and dismantled by the armies of Titus, but he didn't set up an idol in it. He didn't take his place in the temple and proclaim himself God. He didn't sacrifice an unclean animal. None of that. And those are required in these passages: 2 Thessalonians 2, 3, and 4, Revelation 13, 1 to 8, and 14 and 15. That's chapter 14 and 15. Did the people of Judea flee to the mountains when they saw Jerusalem surrounded? There's no indisputable record of any mass exodus at that time to the mountains. It was Pella. So at city of Pella, where many Christians are thought to have fled before the siege, it is a low altitude, and I hope this is still a good link. I don't know. I can't check all the links. In fact, the Roman armies allowed people into Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover, but refused to let them leave in order to put great strain on their resources and supplies during the siege. They knew what they were doing. They were just going to wait out until the remaining Jews cried uncle, because all they had to do was cut off their food and water and supplies and let a bunch of people in before they did it. so that the systems are overloaded. I can think of things happening today like that, where a bunch of people are being brought in, given everything free, medical care, places to live, money to spend, where the citizens born here, we are natives of the land we're born in, regardless of our ancestry, are made to pay it all and get none of the benefits. So this is still a tactic being used today, so this shouldn't be unfamiliar. And that's what the Romans did, and that led up to the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in 70 AD. So it wasn't sudden. 1 Thessalonians 5:3 and Luke 21:34 say they had to be sudden. When people are saying peace and safety, there was nothing like that happening in 70 AD. There was a long siege. And I have a source for that. Hopefully it's still good. Did Nero, whom some identify as the final fulfillment of the prophecies of both Daniel and Revelation regarding the man of sin, man of lawlessness, beast, Antichrist, did he die as he's had to die in 2 Thessalonians 2:8 and Revelation 19:19 and 21? We could go look at those real quick if you want. Let me see if I can. I'll have to take out the word and, or it won't find it. And let's see what it says. The person who is lawless will be revealed. The Lord, let me, whoops, make that larger. The Lord Jesus will destroy him with the breath from his mouth. And then Revelation 19 says, the beasts and the kings of the earth and the armies gathered to make war with Jesus, but the beast was seized with the false prophet. They were thrown alive into the lake of fire. The rest were killed by the sword that comes from the mouth of the rider on the horse, and all the birds ate the fill of their flesh. So that's how the Antichrist dies. Did Nero die that way? No, he committed suicide. Neither did he or any of his associates cause the whole world, even if limited to the Roman Empire, to take a mark on their forehead or right hand and forbid commerce without it. None of that happened, and you can't allegorize it. There's no warrant to do so in the text or in history. Did Jesus return in the clouds accompanied by all the signs in the sky that we mentioned, read about earlier? And did he set up his visible earthly kingdom for 1,000 years? It's invisible. You just got to believe it. No. It should have happened at or shortly after the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in 70 AD, if that event marks the final fulfillment of Daniel's prophecy in Revelation. But the only way to claim it happened is completely spiritualize it, and this is inconsistent with the claim that everything else, such as the destruction and the abomination, was literal and physical. They're cherry picking. Why do they think that the destruction and the abomination had to be literal and physical, but nothing after that is literal and physical? You didn't have to see Jesus come in the clouds. You didn't have to have Satan literally thrown into the abyss really for 1,000 years. It's inconsistent. Some aspects of the prophecy were fulfilled in 70 AD, others in the ensuing centuries, such as the trampling and scattering of Israel. But other details have yet to occur. We cannot presume that the unfulfilled parts remain, that only the unfulfilled parts remain, since we already have seen that Jesus put events such as the abomination in the future, in spite of it having been fulfilled by Antiochus Epiphanes in the past. So we don't always know which ones will happen again or happen for the first time. Only the first time ones, the ones we know will happen, but the ones that have happened before, we can't say if there's another fulfillment left for those. And you read Revelation 12 and 13 more about the abomination and fleeing Jerusalem. That's when they do that. However, there are parts of the book of Daniel that have had many details fulfilled in the past. In fact, Daniel chapters 2 through 7 and 11 have been the most perplexing aspects of the book to critics of the Bible, especially prophecy, because of their detailed predictions of successive kingdoms that I mentioned earlier. And there was a book called Daniel in the Critics' Den, because so many people insisted that nobody could have known these details ahead of time, because they have come to the text with an a priori idea or belief that prophecy is impossible. But all evidence to the contrary. I mean, there's tons of evidence on when Daniel was written and proves the uncanny accuracy of the details in the prophecies. So, we have to be careful that we don't insist that something that did happen in the past can't happen again, but we can insist that those that haven't happened can't be spiritualized away as having happened and nobody saw it. That's called blind faith. So let's look at some specific prophecies. And in a bit, we're going to look at Constable's notes, especially, well, I'm going to skip down here to when we get to chapter 11. Okay, and I'm sorry again about the small text. Chapter 2 is Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the statue. His head was made of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze, lower legs of iron, and feet of a mixture of iron and clay. And you can all read through Daniel 2 for details. I like to summarize because there's a lot of points to make and an hour to do them in. So, Daniel identified the head as Nebuchadnezzar himself, king of the Babylonian Empire. He would be followed by Medo-Persia, ruled by Darius the Mede and Cyrus the Persian. Then the Greek Empire, ruled by Alexander the Great, and one that would smash all others that they didn't name at that time, but it turned out to be Rome. I mean, that's the next empire after Greece. It's coming and believe that the two legs represent some kind of division or separation, yet the statue also has 2 arms and 2 feet, without anyone presuming such a separation. I don't see any significance in the legs being separated. Hey, Billy, Sunday, good to see you. Why do they insist that the legs are 2 separate, represent a split of east-west or something like that, when they don't do the same for the arms? Never made any sense to me. The significance of the statue is in the metals, not the structure, except for the feet as a mixture of iron and clay. Just as we do not separate the 10 toes into 2 groups of 5. There's just 10 kingdoms, we know that, but we don't split them in 2. So also we should not think that the 2 lower legs, curiously not the upper legs, represent a division. As for the feet and toes, the text states that the iron and clay represent a divided kingdom of strength and weakness. That's the only division is in the feet. Strength and weakness, composed of a mixture of seeds, according to Daniel 2:41-43. Whether this mixture means a clash of cultures and ideologies, or even between humans and semi or non-humans, the focus is on their inability to blend, not the reason for the inability. It's a division between strength and weakness, not east and west. That's what the context gives us. So, even today we can have a concept of this in the fact that they're trying right now, through the thing I've been talking about now and then, today is a clash of cultures. They're trying to make them blend together, and it's not working. They're trying to bring people from very different cultures and languages into Western nations and smash them together by force, and it's not going to work. It's a weak kingdom. Okay, so that's where the division is in the statue. It's in the feet, especially that the composition of the feet. Not anything like an east-west division. It's strength and weakness. Iron is strong, clay is not. And then that was chapter 2. And then in chapter 8, we have a vision about a goat and a ram. And the angel tells Daniel that the ram's 2 horns represent the kings of Media and Persia. So there's no need to further allegorize this. What do the kings of Media and Persia symbolize? They don't symbolize anything. They are what the symbol points to, a physical reality. It describes the conquest of Alexander the Great, the first king of Greece, after whose death 4 of his generals would rule. Their names were, if I can pronounce, Lysimachus, Cassander, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. The little horn coming later, if you look in chapter 8, was none other than Antiochus Epiphanes, who didn't die in battle, but from an infestation of worms. I got a link for that, hopefully it's live. Or, still there, not broken. So we're told who these things are, who they represent. We have 4 empires. The third one, Greece, or comes after the Medo-Persian Empire. Alexander the Great did not leave any heirs, and so his kingdom, he died unexpectedly very young. His kingdom went to his 4 generals. And the little horn was, like I said, Antiochus Epiphanes, who didn't die the way the final Antichrist dies, just as Nero didn't. So we can't put this in the past. But chapter 11 is where it gets interesting, because there's a switch between past and future that's very clear. And that's where we'll go looking at Dr. Constable's notes, but let me look at this part first. The 4 generals is described in detail in chapter 11. That's who chapter 11 is talking about. Okay, cool, thanks, Divergent. Chapter 11 is about the 4 generals who took over after Alexander the Great died. Ptolemy the First was the king of the south. So if you read king of the south in that passage, you're looking at Ptolemy the First. The daughter was Berenice, actually a granddaughter, as her father was Ptolemy the Second, who was given in marriage to Antiochus the Second in a doomed plan to achieve political gains by intrigue and deception. After various raids and generations, the king of the south was Ptolemy the Fourth and then Ptolemy the Fifth. That's historical record. So we might wonder who these people are, but looking back on it, we can see who they were and how Daniel couldn't possibly have known this at the time of the writing. So then the king of the north was Antiochus III, who as prophesied was utterly defeated in 217 BC. So not Antiochus Epiphanes yet, who died in 167. The details fit historical record as with the Ptolemies right up to the contemptible person, Antiochus Epiphanes. It is he who is believed to have engineered the murder of a prince of the covenant, I'm quoting that because that's what Daniel says, who turned out to be Onias III, who was the high priest. The first chapter of the apocryphal book of 1 Maccabees details his plundering of the temple and other acts of savagery. Again, I'm saying, go ahead and read those books, but remember they're not scripture, they are supporting documents that provide some valuable historical context. Though they were fulfilled in the past, we cannot dogmatically state that no future fulfillments remain. This applies also to the preterist claims I've mentioned earlier, not by name, but by description, that just because they can find a way to force fit a fulfillment in the past doesn't mean it can't happen again. That's what the Bible gives us. So, but on the other hand, some of these things that we know were fulfilled in the past, we can't guarantee they'll be repeated. In all the details of the remaining prophecies given in Revelation, there's no mention of the kings of the north and south, and details that would connect them to future events. So Revelation doesn't mention them. Just saying that. It's not a slam dunk, I'm just saying that. So though a future fulfillment is possible, it seems unlikely for all this stuff that happened with the Ptolemies and all that. But starting in verse 36, whoops, this scrolling is uncontrollable sometimes, we read of the king who exalts himself, who has no regard for the gods of his fathers or the desire of women, I'll get back to that, and instead honor a god of fortresses. We might still tie him in with the preceding discussion of Antiochus Epiphanes and the kings of the north and south, but these new details have no historical precedent. More importantly, they're all tied in with chapter 12, which begins with "at that time," and includes the resurrection of the dead. Chapter divisions are unhelpful and sometimes counterproductive. So, 36 is where the tide turns definitively to the future. And this is why I wanted to have up this part. I wish I could enlarge that without it going off the screen to the left. And I can't scroll over anything. It's just not a modern design website. And it says, let me bring that a little bit closer. I don't know what just happened to my live stream. Suddenly it decided to not show me what I'm showing on screen. Hold on just a second. Something went wrong here. And I don't know why that disappeared. I see that it disappeared for you guys too. I don't know. I just tried to move, let me see if I can move this again. I just wanted to move it closer to me because the text is small. All right, now I can move it. I don't know what the problem was before. Anyway, this is Constable's Notes. Highly recommended for most things. As always, at any commentary, when it comes to women, they totally drop the ball. All of them. Anyway, in the revelation given to Daniel about the 77s, we observe what Gabriel told the prophet had already happened. And there's we're near the end of this document. It's very long, just on the book of Daniel. This is a whole Bible commentary. Anyway, those verses describe what would happen in the first 69 sevens. Those verses being Daniel 11, 24 to 26. And then 27 predicts things that have not yet happened. It reveals what will happen in the 70th seven. There's a similar break between Daniel 11, 35 and 36 of chapter 11. What was predicted in Daniel 11, 2 to 35 has happened. What follows in the chapter has not happened. And there's a book he references, Daniel E. Steinman is the Antichrist in Daniel 11. Young also believed that the preceding verses describe Antiochus Epiphanes, but with 1136, Antichrist becomes the subject. Even liberal scholars who believe that liberal not in the political sense, but in the ideological sense, who believe that a 2nd century writer wrote the book as history rather than a prophecy, even those people who deny the date of writing of Daniel admit that all of what follows has no literal fulfillment in the past. A few scholars, liberal and conservative, believe that Antiochus Epiphanes fulfilled some of the predictions, especially those in verses 36-39. However, he says, Constable, I'm not aware of anyone who believes that he fulfilled them all literally. That doesn't mean they won't be fulfilled literally, just that nobody has done it yet. And then he says, in view of later revelation, the Olivet Discourse and the book of Revelation particularly, what the angel told Daniel in these verses must refer to the last one of Daniel's 70 weeks. This is the last 7-year period before Jesus returns to the earth to establish the kingdom, the gospel of the kingdom. And Jesus called the end of it a time of great tribulation. And Daniel's angel called it the worst period of distress that the Jews have ever seen. Therefore, it seems reasonable to conclude that what follows will occur in that 7-year period, the tribulation. And he notes that someone named Culliver gave 7 reasons for believing that the prophecy shifts from Antiochus to Antichrist at Daniel 11:36. Because then, and like I said, it goes into chapter 12 talking about the end. So let me get back to bigger text here. And we read of the king who exalts himself, no regard for the gods of his fathers, or the desire of women. Who is this? This phrase is a Hebraism referring to the desire of Israeli women to be the one that God would choose to give birth to the Messiah. That's all it means. Doesn't mean anything else. Doesn't say anything about the Antichrist being a homosexual. Whether he is or not, irrelevant. He's all kinds of other evil. So, but this phrase, the desire of women, is simply referring to, as some will say, it could be a goddess that women prefer, but in my opinion now, the overwhelming evidence is that this is a Hebraic phrase for wanting to be the one that would give birth to Messiah. Of course, that in the past was Mary. But it will instead honor a god of fortresses or forces, a god unknown to his ancestors. So can this be a Muslim? Nope. I don't believe so. Why would a Muslim care about the desire of women? Why would that phrase be used for him if he were of Muslim upbringing? We might still tie him in with the preceding discussion of Antiochus Epiphanes and the kings of the north and south, but these new details have no historical precedent, as we just read in Constable's notes. So, chapter 12 will begin with "at that time" and the resurrection of the dead. So Antiochus Epiphanes is a very clear type or foreshadow of the ultimate future fulfillment in the Antichrist, which, as we know, is a popular name for the beast in Revelation, also man of sin, man of lawlessness, etc. Early in chapter 12, where we see the phrase Jesus used, a time of distress such as not happened from the beginning of nations until then. That's where Jesus was quoting. So he is putting it in the future, not just a mere 40 years after his ascension. It hadn't happened yet. And 40 doesn't fit in the 70 weeks prophecy. There's been much terrible suffering in the world since then, and such that the fall of Jerusalem cannot have been the ultimate fulfillment of the prophecy. But because of overlap and duality, teachers of Bible prophecy must exercise restraint and caution in looking for modern fulfillments. All we can be sure of is that those things without any historical match will certainly take place, not have certainly take place because somebody said you have to just believe it, even though nobody could see it. And then chapter 7, first half is about a dream about 4 beasts, and the second half is about the interpretation that focuses mainly on the 4th beast. Though the first 3 are described as a winged lion, a bear, and a winged leopard, the 4th is not compared to any known animal. It has 10 horns, 3 of which are replaced by another horn. Does that sound familiar? It should. The angel states that this beast will overcome the righteous for 3.5 years. What did Jesus say about his church? The gates of hell will not prevail against it. So if the gates of hell are prevailing against it, it's not the church. The description of the 4th beast exactly matches that of Revelation, such as in 13:1 and verses 5 through 8, and in chapter 17, verses 12 and 13. They describe the 4th beast the same way that Daniel does. Since none of this describes the situation of 70 AD, it must be yet future. None of these descriptions here fit the past. And allegorization is a wild card. It gets out of contradictions free. Because that's what would happen if you're a preterist and you just ignore those things and play the allegory card. Like I said, it's inconsistent. Why are some things leading up to 70 AD to be taken absolutely literal and physical, but nothing after that? And then chapter 9 of Daniel, we have a good grasp of all that was prophesied, and we can focus on the 70 weeks prophecy of chapter 9, since it lays out a clear sequence, not timing, for every remaining prophecy about Israel. Because it says to put an end to and to seal up prophecy. In that regard, the phrase is referring to finishing or completing. The first 69 of those weeks was marked as completed when Jesus came. Now 7 years remain, divided into 2 halves at the point where the 7-year treaty is broken by the abomination. So when we see that same event in the New Testament, we know that it marks the midpoint of the 7 years, because that's when the abomination happens. A 7-year treaty or contract or covenant is enforced or put into force, however you want to take that phrase, but halfway through the 7, that's 3.5 years, this treaty is broken by this desecration of the temple. So, that's how you can match up Daniel to Revelation in the sequence. Because when you see that same event in Revelation, you know that's what Daniel was talking about with the abomination and declaring himself God. And so that means there's 3.5 years left of tribulation after that happens. So that's how you know, if you're an unbeliever right now and you go through this, you see that abomination, you know you've got 3.5 years left of absolute hell on earth. We must not overlook the stated purpose of the 70 weeks. It's all about Israel. Couldn't be any more clear. And to atone for sin, begin eternal righteousness, seal up prophecy, and anoint or dedicate the most holy place. And in the words in the prophecy itself, says this is for your people, Daniel, the Jews, your holy city, Jerusalem, and the temple in Jerusalem. It's a bullseye. Saying this prophecy is for Israel. It couldn't be any more clear. So the atonement for sin and end of all prophecy will not be completed until that final 7 years ends. That's when it's completed. It hasn't finished yet. This is a very clear and focused prophecy to and about Israel and Jerusalem rather than the body of Christ or the world at large. Certainly the judgment of the nations included in other accounts, But this particular prophecy is very exclusive. But we know from that, from Revelation, and from other things in the Old Testament, such as Joel and Zechariah, the whole world will be involved in this. After all, if Israel is being overrun by Gentiles, there have to be Gentiles. Okay? The 70 weeks prophecy of Daniel 9:24-27 is easily the most familiar to students of Bible prophecy. So we're going to read it. 77s are decreed for your people, your holy city. It's talking about finishing their transgressions. This is to purify Israel. An end to their sin, and atoning for their wickedness. As a nation, we're not talking about individual salvation here. That is achieved through faith in Jesus in this age of grace. To bring in everlasting righteousness, that is to say, Israel will never go astray again. That's from many other prophecies as well. To seal up vision and prophecy, which has been all about Israel. And to anoint the most holy place. You can't do that if it isn't there, and it's for their whole nation, and their whole nation has in the past had a temple. No one understand this from the time of the word goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the anointed one, the ruler, comes. There will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. That 7 and 62 is 69 of the 70. It will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble. After the 62, there's 7 and then 62. So after that, not just after 62 instead of 69, the anointed one will be put to death and will have nothing. The people of the ruler who will come, there's Titus and destroying Jerusalem, the city and the sanctuary. After that, some more stuff happens. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1/7. This is someone coming in a second fulfillment of Titus. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1/7. That's the he, the nearest antecedent. The people of the ruler who will come, that's the he. It's not the prince back here. And Jesus made no 7-year covenant. At the Last Supper, he said this, doing the bread and cup, he said, with the cup, he said, this is my blood of the new covenant. And nothing happened within 7 years, not even 3.5 years, or 3.5 days. His ministry was completed. His final week was about to end as a mortal. You can't shoehorn either his final week, the second half of it, or 40 years into, past the 70th week. You can't shoehorn that in there. The new covenant he was signing wasn't limited to 7 years and didn't begin until just before his death, or at his death, I should say. So that's not the he. The he is someone like Titus. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1/7. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. Not talking about infiltrating Christians. And at the temple, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation, and the end that is decreed is poured out on him. So, let's summarize that. Prophecy concerns the people of Israel and Jerusalem, not the body of Christ. And then all these purposes, to complete their transgression and their sin, atone for their wickedness, bring in everlasting righteousness to them. They won't be scattered anymore. Vision and prophecy will be fulfilled. And they will anoint the most holy place in the temple. That's the purpose of this. Israel will be purified. The 70 weeks would begin when the decree was given, and that turned out to be Nebuchadnezzar to rebuild Jerusalem. It would stop short of the final week when the Messiah would be killed. He would be cut off. There would be a prince to come, now known to be Titus, whose people destroyed Jerusalem and the temple in 70 AD. This is the same event Jesus referred to about not one stone being left upon another in Matthew 24:2. The Romans wanted the gold that had melted between the cracks of the blocks in the building because they had set the building on fire and made the gold melt, and they wanted the gold, so they broke it all apart. After this event, After, there would be wars and desolations. Then after that, a span of wars would come. After that span of wars would come he who does all of these following things. And this has not happened in the past. We've gone over before. He did not confirm a 7-year covenant or treaty with many. He did not violate the treaty at the midpoint by ending sacrifice and offering in the temple. And he did not set up an idol in the temple. Those things follow other things. Jesus did not set up any idols, did not make or break any 7-year treaties. But the same he has to do all of those things. So it's not talking about Jesus there. So I think it's pretty clear that all of these things in Daniel are referring to Israel, to the succession of kingdoms leading up to the final 70 weeks. And they would be, we know from looking past history that 69 of the 70 are complete. There's one more to go, 7 years remaining. We know they're years because of hindsight, because of 483 years between that decree and when Jesus was killed. And so 7 years remain. That's what the tribulation is. That's how we know it's 7 years, because people look at Revelation only and go, it doesn't say 7 years. Doesn't have to. It's got so many references to the Old Testament, it should be abundantly obvious. But not if you surface skim, and not if you take things out of context. And that's why you get so many crazy interpretations. So, Daniel is, like I said, the motherlode of Bible prophecy when it comes to that which remains especially. And we need to have known these things before we even think about looking at Revelation. Now, next time, let me get my notes, and something's really bothering my throat and eyes. I think somebody must be grilling outside. Next time, I think I'm going to go, we have this the chapters in the book here on the prophecy section. I just did this one. I'm going to go to the 3 prophetic cities, then the 2 prophetic paths, and then I'll do the rapture last, okay? Because I think that just makes more sense as an order. I'm not going to change these books online. They're, if I keep tweaking things, I'll never be done, and it's a royal pain to keep trying to update them. So the link to Dropbox is the most up to date. So. And I do tweak things there now and then. I keep tweaking those. I keep fixing typos, and once in a while I'll fix a link that's broken. But so if you download them, check once in a while. I don't have any way to really catalog changes and when they were made. You'll just have to, download what you can now while you're sure you can, and then later you can re-download some things just in case I changed one of them. So yeah, next time we're going to go over the 3 cities, and I highly recommend looking at Constable's notes on Daniel if you want to follow up on some things from today's talk. Thank you, One Up, and any other kind comments I've missed. I haven't had a chance till now to really look at the chat. Let's see. I don't think I see any questions. I see, I guess, basically a prayer request. Let's see. And passage of Jeremiah 29:11. Yeah, plans for prosper in the future, and etc. That's one that refers specifically to the Jews, but it's a reminder that God isn't done with them, that they are still chosen people. We're chosen too, but they're a chosen nation, and he hasn't finished his prophecies to them, especially the millennium, which we've gone over before. Those will be literally fulfilled. Let's see. Yeah, I don't want to. I think about what's coming. We can already see it forming. We can see famines and pestilence and economic instability. The first world countries are crumbling by design, and things are going to get very bad. And then a savior will come along just when things are really terrible, and then promise them peace if they will only fall down and worship him. Sounds familiar. It sounds exactly like what Satan said to Jesus, trying to tempt him to sin right after he was baptized by John the Baptist. So, what goes around comes around. These things are repetitive, And that's why it's all the more inexcusable if we don't know what to expect, because we have the most perspective from history to know what we should expect. We don't get many that come here for the live streams, but they are on YouTube. I'm not recording them on my local computer. So I don't know. It's not always easy to get downloads from YouTube, but there are ways if you look diligently. So, next time we'll go on to the 3 cities. And, thanks for the Dropbox link there, Divergent Droid. Hopefully we'll have Chow back with us next week. He's having some internet issues. And, everybody take care till then. Have a happy, safe weekend. If you're not from the U.S., it's Independence Day weekend. What that ever means now, I don't know. But there you are. We'll see you then.